Well, thank you very much. Thank you for not disinviting me. I'd like to start by recognizing the senior class for the serious lack of judgment and common sense that it clearly displayed when it voted to give me this award. As I see it, it all paid off. My sustained contributions to great inflation over the years, my consistently low demands regarding students' work, my warm and fuzzy personality, and the constant smile on my face, like the one I have right now. So here we are, and some of you have told me that what you wanted to hear from me today was some general life advice, some wonderful words of wisdom about life after COVID. That is truly terrifying. Not only because I don't exactly see myself as a fountain of wisdom, but because it means that this talk then has to be a radical departure from the kind of talks I usually give, whether it is at Colby or elsewhere. For one, it's not going to be about the topic in my area of expertise. I thought this was not the time and place for that. So I hope if you forgive me, if what I have to say comes across as too much about myself. But the fact is that these are personal reflections. So inevitably, they are based on my own experiences, which means that I will talk about those experiences a little bit more than I usually am comfortable with. And with that in mind, let me offer 5 pieces of advice. First and foremost, don't ever say no to yourself. Let someone else say no to you. What I mean here, for instance, is do not fail to apply for a position for which you believe that you don't have all the credentials, or for which you feel that far too many other people more qualified than you are will apply. Instead, apply for that position. Make your case. Explain why you are the right person for the job. For one, you never really know what it is that they are looking for. And they'll turn you down if that is what they want to do. But just don't turn yourself down. And if you let others be the ones responsible for turning you down, you might be surprised to find out that they do not turn you down as often as you might have expected. For what it's worth, my experience has been that far too many people, especially hardworking, perfectionist types, feel they have to wait until they have all of their ducks in a row before they go after some opportunities. They hold back. They hold back until they feel truly ready and perfectly qualified. I certainly have felt that way at times. But you may want to remember that that is not always a good thing. As I'm sure you've heard before, sometimes showing up is all it takes. It's all it takes to get the job, it's all it takes to get the contract, or to be able to seize whatever opportunity presents itself to you. For instance, when I was asked to submit my name for my first State Department project, which involved US assistance to the Lebanese Chamber of Deputies, I initially was very reluctant to submit my CV. I simply felt that I did not have sufficient experience in that area. But someone convinced me to go ahead anyway. And guess what? I did get the assignment. And I learned a thing or two along the way. And that project led to another project, and then to one after that. And since then, I've been involved in this type of endeavor, not only across the Middle East and North Africa, but also in the Balkans, in the Caucasus, in Southeastern Europe, in South Asia, and in Africa. So looking back, it was basically that accidental first project for which I felt neither truly ready nor qualified that made it possible for me over the years to engage on several continents with civil society groups, with humanitarian organizations, business leaders, madrasa students, former political prisoners, government officials, opposition leaders, and members of groups that are not exactly always part of the political mainstream. And as some of you know, that experience shapes what I teach, how I teach it, and the kinds of skills, attitudes, knowledge that I try to convey in the classroom. And so again, if I look back, I really don't know what my own value added to the college would have been for the past 20 years had I not been convinced by someone else in 1993 to go for an opportunity for which I was, in retrospect, foolishly so, unwilling to even be considered. Don't make that mistake. The broader lesson may be something like this. It is both natural and all right sometimes to doubt yourself. But it's not okay to let those self-doubts stop you from going after opportunities. And of course, it's okay to fail when you go after opportunities. In fact, if you don't fail, it may mean that you are not taking enough calculated risks. Which brings up a second related piece of advice. Make a point of going out of your comfort zone. If the goal is worth it, then take calculated risks in the pursuit of that goal. That is how you are most likely to accomplish big things professionally. But more importantly, that's probably the only way you can continue to broaden your frame of reference, which after all is a big part of what your Kobe education was all about. Now, when I say go out of your comfort zone, it sounds like harmless, benign advice, but it's not. Remember that you typically should feel discomfort when you operate out of your comfort zone. That's the point. The rule of thumb is probably something like this. If at some point you are not asking yourself the question, why in the world did I put myself in that position? Then you probably haven't gone out of your comfort zone. One time I remember asking myself that question was in Marloula. Marloula is a small place, it's about 40 miles away from Damascus. It's buried in the mountains. It's also one of the last places on earth where Aramaic is still spoken. I was in my 20s. I was traveling across Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, Palestine. At that time I was in Syria. I was traveling with very little cash. Very little cash. And while I was in Damascus, I probably had eaten something that I clearly shouldn't have. Well, you know, I had been ill before, but never like that. The fever and the pain became so intense that I literally, quite literally, was begging to be put out of my misery. I was on my own, I had no support, and to be frank, the place was not exactly filled with Mayo clinics. Had I not found the convent where a few Greek Orthodox nuns nursed me back to health through a steady diet of Guilain, yogurt, and dried fruits, I don't know what would have happened to me, but it would not have been a good ending. Now, if you had asked me then, at the time, was it worth it? I would have screamed, no! But, when I look back, I have to acknowledge that that was just the unfortunate part. And the unfortunate component of 3 months of exploration that really broadened my horizons, that solidified my interest in the Middle East, and that ended up shaping a good deal of what I do professionally, except I didn't know it at the time, and I could not have known it. Another example. 2 years ago, I was in Kathmandu. A few colleagues and I had been asked to make sense of some of the main changes that have affected Nepali politics in the past 2 decades, and to try to reflect on what it all means for that country moving forward. Now, one of the changes on which we zeroed in very quickly was the political assertion of constituencies that historically have been on the political and social margins of life in Nepal. And basically, what was clear is that these formerly excluded constituencies were trying to claim a larger share of the public sphere, that they were doing so at the expense of the high caste and the old elites that historically had dominated politics in Nepal. In any event, it was very clear to us that to really understand that, we needed to travel pretty far away from Kathmandu. We needed to travel to parts of the country that were still very isolated. Now, one of them was the rugged highlands of the Ropa districts, completely in the west. Kathmandu is here, the Ropa district is way in the western part of the country. It's one of the poorest parts of Nepal, the poor country. It's also, of course, it is also the birthplace of the communist insurgency that raged in Nepal from 1996 to 2006. Well, the hotel, and I would put hotel in quotation marks here, but the hotel where I stayed in Ropa was definitely out of my comfort zone. $1.50 a night, breakfast and bedbugs included. I did not eat breakfast, of course. I remember marula all too well. I did not eat anything else. Basically, I survived on a steady diet of Luna bars. The granola bar for women, which had the added advantage of allowing me to develop my more feminine side. I also had brought my own sheets, and I left them behind when I departed because I am environmentally conscious, and I did not want to separate the bedbugs from their natural habitat. Now, I'm in my 50s, and I am a very comfort-oriented bear. Did I need to inflict this on myself? Depends on how you look at it. Probably not. Had I stayed in Kathmandu, there would have been no $1.50 a night hotel, no bed bugs, no forced diet of Luna bars. But, on the other hand, I would have left that country as ignorant as I was about it when I came in, and I would have gotten none of the insight that the trip to Europa and other isolated places provided into the reality of the country and into things such as why and how a communist insurgency could develop in Nepal in the late 20th century. Another example. Yes, Josh, another example, sorry. Just this year, for the first 2 weeks in January, I could not leave from my hotel in Islamabad without two Pakistani former Special Forces guys with me at all times. Two fellows whose physical appearance was so intimidating that I almost felt that anyone brave enough to take on those two guys did deserve to kill me. So it's a long story, but for all sorts of reasons, Pakistan was a challenge. But consider the payoffs for someone like me who studies violent extremist movements. Those 2 weeks provided more insights into the realities of Pakistan than I could have gotten from reading any combination of books and articles about the subject. More importantly, they allowed me to get a lot more out of the books and news stories that I read about Pakistan. How did that happen? It happened because that experience broadened my frame of reference. It's all about the frame of reference. And to get that frame of reference, one typically must venture out of one's comfort zone. So in my case, going out of my comfort zone usually has meant traveling to, well, let's put it this way, uncomfortable places. Because going there is the only way I can get the interviews I need, the data I need, and a real reading of the countries and situations I am studying, so that then I can relay that to my students in the classroom. And that, by the way, sometimes has put me in situations that I'm not sure I would want my students to witness. Just this past January, later on in January, my bad back and the rest of my aging body found ourselves crunched on a small motorized rickshaw in Colombo. I was basically squeezed between a 6'4" Serbian-American contractor whose head was constantly rattling against the roof of the rickshaw. And on the other side, I had a Marine built like a refrigerator. And I kept telling him, Trevor, you can't fit. You cannot fit in that rickshaw. But, he was much stronger than I was. He had a lot more combat experience. And so, I was squeezed in between those two guys. And poor Trevor, I mean, he couldn't fit. I told him he couldn't fit. His leg was constantly hanging out on one side of the rickshaw as we were making our way through Colombo traffic, which, by the way, makes Cairo traffic look very smooth and relaxing. I mean, Trevor had been through 2 tours in Iraq, 1 tour in Afghanistan, but he looked fine, except that I did not think that his leg was going to make it. Now, did I really feel like a back-breaking death defining rickshaw had to be a part of my life at that particular moment? No, I didn't. But again, it's, no pain, no gain. That was the only way I could get back to my hotel after I was told that the last driver at the US Embassy had left for the day. But there's something else here. When experiences like this happen to you, and they can be very unpleasant, I think my back still hasn't recovered. What I have learned is that later on, one often remembers more fondly those, call them whatever you want, those small Indiana Jones moments, because they are what keeps you going through the more tedious parts of the year. In my case, through long, harsh main winters and departmental meetings. Long winters, harsh meetings. In your case, similar memories will keep you going through, long hours at the office, difficult commute, or whatever moments happen to be tedious for you. But more importantly, those moments occur only because you venture out of your comfort zone. And when you do that, the frame of reference that you expand, the instincts that you develop or that you sharpen, the attitudes you develop, all of that, as much as your Kobe education, becomes part of what you will bring to the table as a young professional. They will end up helping you and helping the people with whom you work. And they will do so in ways that you can never anticipate when those moments, unpleasant moments, happen to you. They may inform a business decision that your company has to make, for instance. Or they may draw your attention to pitfalls or to opportunities that you might never have noticed before. One final vignette to illustrate some of the same points. This time drawn from my experience as a 23-year-old, closer to your age, when I was performing my national service obligations at the French embassy in Baghdad. Now that was back in the 1980s. And back then, there was very little interest in Iraq, and there was very little coverage of it in the Western media. In fact, Iraq was probably the least well-known Arab country, largely because the Ba'athist regime had been so successful in sealing it off to the outside world, but also because the Iran-Iraq war was raging at the time. And the Iran-Iraq war is not exactly a great tourist attraction. But for better or for worse, when I think back, those were difficult years for me, but when I think back, what I got out of that experience, I just could not have gotten in any other way. For one, 9 Iranian Scud missiles landed on Baghdad during my tour of duty. And one of the lessons I learned was, there is really nothing like a Scud to focus the mind. The Iranians were trying to hit selected targets in the Iraqi capital. The presidential palace, the headquarters of the Mukhabarat, Iraqi intelligence, the main telecommunications center. But the Scuds they were using were not very precise, and so they tended to land in a random pattern around the capital. Scud attacks usually took place in the middle of the night, typically around midnight, actually. And the Iranian regime was kind enough at the time to let us know that it was coming about 24 hours in advance. Khomeini himself typically would go on the radio and announce that, tonight we will launch a scud and hopefully obliterate a great part of Baghdad. And I remember lying in my bed, just waiting for the truly horrifying blast. The noise of shattering glass everywhere, the screaming, the panic, the chaos, the total mayhem that typically would follow an attack. I remember driving to work the next morning, passing by city blocks that had been cratered and obliterated by an Iranian scud the night before. I remember the feeling of total powerlessness created at night by the realization that, hey, my neighborhood could be next. Some of you may have similar unpleasant experiences. Perhaps not that bad, but unpleasant and challenging nonetheless. If so, here is the good news. Experiences like that really help you put in perspective challenges and setbacks that you face later on in your life. All you have to do is just sit back a bit and remember, and you tell yourself, now that back then, that was bad. This isn't so bad. So for me to this day, Iraq remains an important part of my frame of reference. I think the only reason why I truly understand the real power of modern weapons is because I can remember the impact on the nervous system of a scud smashing into the Iraqi capital. The only reason why I think I have some inkling of what life in a police state entails is not because I've read books about it, but because I spent those 2 years living in a society where children were encouraged at school to report on parents, and so as a result, parents truly would be looking at their own children as potential informers. And it is something to read about seeing fear in people's eyes, but it is something completely different in terms of frame of reference to experience that firsthand. Now, just to be clear, I want to be very clear here. Am I suggesting that you put yourself in situations like the one that I have just described? Absolutely not. Do not do it. Do not do it. But all I'm saying is the following. Do make a point of looking for your own out of your comfort zone set of experiences. And when you do that, by the way, always think carefully about whether the risks are truly worth it. If you're not sure, always err on the side of caution. And if there are any risks involved, don't ever proceed unless and until you have not a general understanding of these risks, but a granular understanding of the exact nature of those risks, and until you have developed risk mitigation strategies. I have 3 final, and don't worry, much briefer suggestions for you. Give me 6 minutes. No, I know. You know that. It's probably going to be 8. But one is, and this comes from the guy who keeps emphasizing, analytical skills. But one is the following: trust your intuition. Intuition about people, intuition about opportunities, and intuition about situations you may find yourself in. So for example, you're going to be faced with that, trust me, at some point. A decision that you have to make seems to make perfect sense on paper. You carefully analyze it. You look at the pros and cons, and it seems to be a no-brainer, but your intuition is warning you against it. If that's the case, just don't disregard your intuition. It may be that your brain, unbeknownst to you, your brain is processing information about that situation and is trying to warn you against it. So do not disregard your intuition. I happen to believe that intuition matters a lot. It matters when engaging people. I think it matters when engaging people, but I know for a fact that it matters a lot when it comes to personal safety. I can think of quite a few times when conducting fieldwork, when my intuition told me to disengage. Whenever I have felt, something is off. I don't think I should be here for much longer. And I have then opted for a graceful exit. In fact, quite often, an exit devoid of any grace. I think whenever I have done that, it turned out to be the right decision. So much so, in fact, that Professor Corrado, my fellow mujahid in the government department, Professor Corrado remains convinced that there is a causal relationship between my short stay in a country and its political disintegration shortly after I leave. It's bizarre. He's got that in his head. I keep telling him it's not true, but just in the past few years, he's pointed to Mali, Montenegro, Mauritania, Lebanon, Pakistan, and a few other places to support his view on the matter. He's now convinced, this is pretty sad, but he's now convinced that the only reason why the Maldives may go under water in the next 30 years is because I've been there twice. But one more point about intuition. I think there is a connection between going out of your comfort zone and trusting your intuition. And my experience suggests that the connection goes something like this. When you go out of your comfort zone, turn up the intuition. If something feels off, it probably means that something is off. Your brain may be telling you that it is time to disengage. My penultimate piece of advice is to really know what your comparative advantage is. I knew it. I just knew it. Professor Finley back there has been drifting for the past half hour, and I just mentioned comparative advantage, and he wakes up. He's like, oh, great, finally Denoeux has something relevant to say. Welcome back, Dave. Anyway, you really have to know what your comparative advantage is. What I mean here is the following. What are you particularly good at relative to other people? What are some of the skills that you have that other people don't have or don't have to the same extent? And who is likely to place particularly high value on those skills of yours? I'm sure that you already have some sense of this, but it may not be as specific and understanding as you should have. So in the next few weeks, just take some time to think about it. Ask your friends, ask your peers, ask your parents. Because you really cannot take advantage of your comparative advantage if you do not know A, what that comparative advantage is, and B, who is likely to place particularly high value on the skills that you have and that other people do not necessarily have. Finally, while I think it is useful for you to think about what you want your professional life to be, don't overplan, and certainly do not obsess about it. When I was your age, I certainly never thought I would become an academic. I stumbled into this profession, literally. I am an accidental academic. So I suspect that today a lot of you are feeling anxious about what is next. That's normal. But you really must trust that by and large, things have a way of falling into place. And that in today's world, in any event, it is just not possible for a 21-year-old, a 22-year-old to plan his or her professional life, since you'll have several careers and presumably one or two that do not even exist today. So you need to trust that. And you need to trust your instincts. You need to trust your intuition. And you need to try to make a point of going out of your comfort zone. And when you do that, you need to make sure that you are not needlessly endangering yourself. I think that's it for the advice, but now for the painful part. I know this is called the last lecture, and I'm not that stupid. I know what it means. I know it means that I'm probably now going to be blindfolded and taken to a firing squad or a location that falls under our rendition program. But before that happens, let me tell you how honored, how truly honored I am by this award. No matter what else I do professionally, and no matter how rewarding I find it. Teaching has been and remains the single focus of my professional life. Everything I do feeds into it. That's the core mission. It is my core mission. It is the core mission of the college. Everything we do at the college should feed into that core mission, not distract from it. And that is why I'm so honored that you've given me the Charles Bassett Award. I thank you very, very much. And most importantly, congratulations to all of you.